On November 14, 1970, Southern Airways Flight 932 crashed into a tree-covered hillside just over a mile shy of the Tri-State Airport in Cerrito, West Virginia. The aircraft was occupied by members of the Marshall University football team, including players, coaches, and boosters, making their way back from a game against the East Carolina Pirates in Greenville, North Carolina. The sudden and unexpected collision would go down as the deadliest sports-related tragedy in the history of the United States. The flight was the only one Marshall's football team would be making that year, as they were able to travel to most games by bus. In fact, they nearly didn't even make this trip in the air, as Southern Airways initially rejected Marshall's flight plans due to them exceeding the takeoff weight limits of the DC-9 aircraft. However, at the last minute, they were able to come to terms by cutting 2,000 pounds from the weight to get it down to 17,500 pounds. That evening, 37 Marshall football players boarded the plane. Along with them, 8 members of the coaching staff, including the team's head coach, Rick Tolley, 25 boosters, and the 4 crew members. The plane was piloted by Captain Frank Abbott, who had been flying with Southern Airways for 21 years, accumulating more than 18,500 flight hours, including 2,194 hours in the DC-9. Accompanying him was First Officer Jerry Smith, who began his career with Southern Airways in 1965 and brought an additional 5,800 flight hours with him into the flight. Combined, they made a formidable team with plenty of experience in the air. They departed the runway at Stallings Field in Kinston, North Carolina at 6:38 p.m. en route to the Huntington Tri-State Airport in Wayne County, West Virginia. The relatively short trip had an estimated flight time of just 52 minutes. The excursion went without a hitch, but as they neared their destination, visibility became a challenge. Exactly 45 minutes into the flight, at 7:23 p.m., the crew aboard the DC-9 made radio contact with Huntington Approach Control. The aircraft was instructed to decrease altitude to 5,000 feet. They were cleared for approach toward runway 11 and advised of the wind conditions on the ground. Huntington Approach Control also advised that there was a light rain, fog, smoke, and a ragged ceiling, all of which made the approach a bit more dangerous, but didn't make landing impossible. At 7:34, the crew aboard the aircraft informed air traffic control that they had just passed the outer markers and they were cleared for landing. Anticipating the landing, Huntington Approach Control discussed the approach lighting on the runway, informing the flight crew to let them know when they want the lights cut off. In response, the crew radioed, "Very good." Those words were the last ever heard from the crew aboard Southern Airways Flight 932. Just a moment later, at 7:36 p.m., personnel in the tower spotted a red glow emanating from just west of the airport. The DC-9 no longer responded to calls from approach control, so emergency procedures were initiated. Despite no apparent signs of distress or difficulty, the plane smashed into the treetops on a hillside barely over a mile short of the runway. The impact ripped through and burned down an area of forest 95 feet wide and 279 feet long. The report issued by the National Transportation Safety Board stated that the accident was unsurvivable, and they were correct. No one aboard the Southern Airways Flight 932 survived the accident. All 75 aboard the plane perished. In the wreckage, they discovered the plane's flight data recorder, which began providing insight into the moments leading up to the disaster. The conversation in the cockpit between Captain Abbott and First Officer Smith was captured. About 5 minutes before the crash, Abbott noted that there seemed to be an error with the autopilot. His words expressed surprise that the autopilot system had presumably captured a glide slope signal, when, in fact, there wasn't one. Such a signal provides instructions to the aircraft on how to begin descent, and, in this case, would have resulted in the plane descending automatically at a rate of 700 to 800 feet per second. Based on the evidence, it is actually hypothesized that this issue was caused by an erroneous setting in the cockpit, and subsequent descent rates indicate that this was corrected. Signs that there were concerns in the aircraft continued. At 7:34, the captain was recorded saying, "The autopilot ain't responding just right. Sluggish." It wasn't clear exactly what the pilot was experiencing, and based on the recorded readings of the instruments in the aircraft, this issue did not pose a hazard to them landing the plane. However, the visibility was a hazard. It was dark, rainy, and cloudy, making it difficult for the pilots to see what was ahead. Furthermore, whether human error or mechanical error is not known for sure, but it seemed there was a misunderstanding regarding their true altitude. As an aircraft nears the runway, it is required to make call-outs as to their altitude. Looking back on the conversation in the cockpit, it's clear that something was off. First Officer Smith made the first call-out at 1,000 feet. The call-out was fairly accurate, as their field elevation at the time was 1,014 feet. He made the second call-out at 700 feet above the elevation of the runway. At this point, however, the actual elevation was 502 feet, 200 feet below where they believed they were. The tragic discrepancy continued. Smith called out 200 above, which meant that they were 612 feet. Their true elevation was 396 feet. The final call-out was made, 400 feet, but they were actually at just 177 feet above the terrain below. They were well below the minimum descent altitude for their position and completely unaware. To make matters worse, the plane was allowed to drop a further 90 feet after the crew thought they reached the minimum descent altitude of 400 feet. Of course, they were actually much lower. It appears likely that the flight crew could not see the runway despite being dangerously low, which was likely the reason that the pilot dipped below what they believed the minimum descent altitude to be. This was indicated by a comment from Danny Deese, the flight's charter coordinator, who stated, "Bet it'll be a missed approach," which meant they would have to fly around and attempt the approach again to make sure they aligned with the runway properly. It was at this time that they gave more power to the jet in an attempt to increase the altitude to make their new approach. But it was too late. Before the DC-9 could be corrected, it made impact. Based on the data gathered, there are two potential causes for the crash, the first being erroneous readings from the plane's altimeter and vertical speed indicator. Such errors would have given them false information regarding their altitude and descent speed. The second possible cause could have been human error by First Officer Smith. If he was using the radio altimeter as the primary source for determining their altitude, poor interpretations could have been made due to the terrain because the ground below was substantially lower than the field elevation. There is merit to both of these theories, but also aspects to each that don't make perfect sense. Ultimately, the true cause may never be known. The day following the disaster, on November 15, 1970, a memorial service was held for the lives lost in the disaster at Veterans Memorial Fieldhouse. An outdoor memorial service was also held the Saturday following the crash at Marshall football team's home field, Fairfield Stadium. Sadly, although everyone aboard the plane was documented, the aftermath was so awful that several bodies were unable to be identified. The city largely shut down for the mass funeral service held for the deceased. Businesses and government offices closed, and classes were canceled. As a result of the tragedy, the community lost sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters. 70 children lost at least one parent, and 18 children became orphaned. The tragedy was so immense that Marshall's president, Donald Dedmond, was prepared to terminate the school's football program before being convinced to continue it by Jack Lengyel. The event has been memorialized in popular culture on television and film, including the movie starring Matthew McConaughey called We Are Marshall. Commemorating the disaster outside the Memorial Student Center at Marshall is a 13-foot tall fountain which reads, "They shall live on in the hearts of their families and friends forever." And this memorial records their loss to the university and to the community. Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to one of my subscribers, AngelCat621, for suggesting this topic. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to my channel to help it grow. If you'd like to support my channel, use the link in the description to become a patron of my Patreon, or click the join button below to become an official member of my channel. Until next time.